Welcome to podcast number 4, prepared by Profweb and Salties. This is our first podcast of the 2020-2021 academic year. I'm Ryan, an editor from Profweb.ca, and I'm joined by Kevin, a physics teacher from Dawson College, who's also a member of the Salties Active Teaching and Learning Community of Practice. Today we have invited Selma Hamdani and Cory Legassic from Dawson College. In this podcast, we will be talking about pedagogical strategies for maintaining student engagement at a distance and the recent experience of these teachers during the pivot to alternative forms of teaching.
Would you please both introduce yourselves, name, department, and some of the courses you're currently teaching? Start with Cory, maybe?
Sure. So my name is Cory Legassic, and I'm a full-time instructor at Dawson College. I'm also the coordinator of New School, which is our alternative school within Dawson. I teach in humanities and sociology, and I am teaching this semester a New School course on ethics and schooling, and I'm teaching also for the first time transitions program course for Indigenous students, starting off at Dawson, their first semester ever at Dawson online. So those are my two courses. It's a learning perspectives course, like study skill strategies.
Selma?
Yes, my name is Selma Hamdani, and I'm a teacher in the psychology department at Dawson College. I'm also the co-coordinator of the Dawson College Active Learning Community, so the DALC. I teach mostly introduction to psychology courses. This semester I'm teaching an interaction and communication course that's being revamped. And for the first time, we have one of our courses in psychology that is a general psychology course that has a theme. So our theme is race, ethnicity, and migrations. It's a learning community, so it's taught in tandem with two other teachers from anthropology and psychology.
So Selma, you're a co-director of the Dawson Active Learning Community, also known as DALC. Can you tell us about the community of practice and describe how this community supported teachers during the last semester and during the pivot to alternative forms of teaching this semester?
So the purpose of this community, of our community, is to support teachers to improve teaching and learning through evidence-based strategies and pedagogical practices. So we really, our aim is to promote active learning in the classrooms. Now, when last semester hit, I think everybody was in survival mode. And the active learning community, the DLC, holds weekly meetings with workshops or drop-in sessions every Friday, just to foster that spirit of community. So we still continued with that. We are still ongoing. We still have our regular Friday meetings, but we had to shift gear last semester because just like everybody else, our plans sort of were derailed by the pandemic. And the themes we had planned and the workshops we had planned were no longer possible in person. So we shifted to obviously this online mode, but we implemented more drop-in sessions that had no theme in particular, where teachers could just come in and connect with one another or just vent. And they have been quite successful. We've had a lot of participation. We've had a lot of people showing up just to say hi, just to say, hey, look, there are other people in the same boat. But last semester, we also saw a new interest in active learning from people who didn't necessarily know about it, because of the way that the online classrooms are forcing people to think about their pedagogies and to shift from a traditional lecturing in classrooms. So we've had some newcomers in the community that wanted to learn more about the active learning pedagogies and how to engage students, because they felt that in the online environment that was it became quite apparent that you need to engage students, otherwise it doesn't work. So that was a plus for us. So it's one of our silver linings, I guess. And we have one of our collaborators, Jim Slaughter, who framed this, I guess, this whatever we were going through in wonderful words. So he basically came up with this catchphrase of survive, strive, and thrive. So last semester we were in survive mode, just barely making it, trying to adapt whatever we had to this new medium. And our aim is to go from this just barely survival mode to striving for better practices, and then thriving in this online environment, or in this new reality that we're facing. So the goal for the active learning community this semester is to shift towards the thriving goals.
So what strategies did you both employ during the winter 2020 semester, or are currently employing, to promote student engagement with the material and also to maintain motivation? So maybe Cory, go first.
For sure. So the first part is I was not teaching in the winter, which felt like a bit of a blessing and a curse. So I felt like I didn't have the struggle of diving in and in survival mode. Instead, I was in a position, because of Salty's research and other coordination work I do, to really support other teachers and kind of see them go through the steps of quickly transitioning into online. But it meant that I had time to think about how I wanted to approach this fall semester, while also realizing, apart from big Zoom meetings where adults can act like students sometimes, and I hadn't had that kind of experience of being in front of the classroom that most of my colleagues had. So, but I've been in it now for 5 weeks. I do teach in unique kind of non-traditional classes. So the temptation to pre-record, like do the flipped classroom of pre-recorded videos and then facilitating in-class discussions. Both of the courses that I teach in are really, really heavily centered around building community and classroom discussion. And the difference between cooperative and collaborative work, like in my classes, both classes were really looking at collaboration between students, where we're not just delegating and teamwork. Okay, we're online, go off into your separate homes, do your own job, come back, and then you're part of a larger product. But it was actually how to get students to really talk to each other and work together on common goals. And so I've been doing a bunch of things. I think one of the most important things in both my classes, the two lessons I've learned, apart from how I deliver content and get them to collaborate, is one is I really build in some rituals and routines in my class. So trying to have some kind of combination of consistency. So there's a kind of structure that students can rely on when they come to my class, but there's also unpredictability, like the way in which we might do it, or I kind of throw in a new element just to kind of spice up like the breakout room structure that we did the following week. So I'm trying to build on things while still having a consistent structure. So one of the first things I think is really important is when my students come to class is I don't dive into content. I put them into breakout rooms right away, and they do check-ins with each other. So I usually have one student, I usually pick on the oldest student in the group, and I say, this is you talk to each other. How are you doing? What's the most annoying thing that happened with school or outside of school? Like what's working, what's getting better? And we got through the growing pains where it was a little bit awkward, and now they go right into it, and I give them 10 minutes, and I'm usually kind of pulling them out of conversations. And I think that has really, it's like the warm up, that kind of cardio warm up at the beginning of class. They come back and they're kind of primed for that kind of discussion. And also that autonomous discussion where I'm not constantly watching them in their group work. So that structure of the check-in and the check-out at the end of the class, like, so in the chat, what's a takeaway? How are you feeling? And they're allowed to say they're hungry, bored, tired, but they know they can kind of just in the chat share how they're feeling. So that sandwich of, you know, reminding them that they get to be full students and feel things at the beginning and the class has been really important. The other thing is, and I'm kind of seeing this as a huge challenge for all teachers, is we were given directives at Dawson that we're required to have a minimum of 25% synchronous time in class. So we can't go completely asynchronous, but we have to have at least 25% synchronous time. And I think most teachers that I know, at least in humanities and social sciences, are really struggling with not holding full synchronous class time. And so in other words, I think our teachers are actually keeping students in class way too long, so that students, instead of, you know, doing a 2.5 hour class in an hour and a half, they're on screen in class for those 2.5 hours, and teachers are having a tough time, you know, translating the in-class experience to online. So that has been a huge goal for me, is try to create that collaborative experience while not stretching my classes above an hour and a half.
Selma?
Pretty much like Cory, I was concerned about the amount of screen time that our students were having. It became apparent to me that you cannot just take your in-person classes or structure and transpose that to online teaching. It just doesn't work. It's not fair to ask the students to be in front of their screens for 6 hours a day, or for teachers for that matter. And then ask them to do their readings online and continue to work online. And instead of saying, I'm going to take my course and transpose that into something that is online, I started from scratch, because the rules of in-presence teaching don't apply to online. You have to adapt. The pedagogy is still the same. So that's the beauty of it, is that if you know what if you know how to teach, you know how to teach in any medium. But you have to apply the right strategies with the tools that you have. So reducing the amount of synchronous work, still within like reasonable amounts, and a lot of check-ins, much more than you would do in normal, like in presence teaching, because there's a need for that community building. There's a need for that sort of connection, and I also used a lot of interactive, collaborative, and cooperative work for students to get to know each other. Some of the little activities I gave them were didn't necessarily count for points, but it was just for them to get to know each other and to get to know the tools and technology that we're using. So I took the first week this semester to just, this was 2 encounters with each section, to just get to know the students and get to know the tools that we're doing. Usually teachers will, we have icebreakers that last a couple of minutes at the beginning of the class, at the beginning of the semester, but this time I really extended the concept of icebreakers, just to create those routes for the students to stick around and to feel comfortable enough to speak their mind and to tell me when it's going too fast or too slow, and to just feel like there's a connection between all of us, between me and the students among themselves. So
zeroing in maybe a bit more on specific active learning strategies, can you tell me what active learning strategies did you maybe adapt for use in the classroom, or what strategies are you using this fall, or Selma, did you apply in the pivot last semester?
As mentioned, I use a lot of collaborative work and cooperative work. I use a lot of interactive, formative assessments. I look at the tools that are available to me, whether it's in Moodle, or I used some of the Saltese tools, even the course flow that I used as to create, to design my course and to showcase the course outline for the students. I show the students a lot of the designs of the activities on course flow, so that they can see where they're going. It's a little map for them to keep track of what is to come. So that's and it also has helped me. There are ways to implement jigsaws online with breakout rooms. It's very feasible to separate the students and to use the jigsaw kind of activity. It could take several forms. So one of the ways is that you can send the students into small groups to interact with one another, and then you can customize this dependent on what you're doing. So you can have them come back and share in a larger group or with the entire class, or you can have them share with another group that has a similar problem, and then they debate among each other. So they're like little pieces of a puzzle that need to fit to make a bigger picture. And then at the end of the activity, each small group had to work on a small problem, but then when they present it to the whole class, it shows a much more comprehensive understanding of the entire problem that you're trying to solve as a class.
Yeah, I mean, can tell we come from the same culture at Dawson. I also use Jigsaw, and I can give you a different example just to illustrate. So in my classes, students will engage with a lot of text. Could be a podcast, a film, a chapter, article. And so if you could imagine that I put my students in smaller reading circles, I call them reading circles. So if you have 5 students in a reading circle, to prepare for class, each of those students, beyond reading, engaging with the text, they adopt a particular role. So one student in the group becomes the source evaluator. What makes this author, this thinker, someone we should be listening to? How do they support their arguments? Another person in the group becomes the illustrator, creating a visual representation, a table, a chart, a drawing that kind of speaks to the text. Another one is the biographer, looking into who this person is, what their background is, what disciplines are they writing from. So if you can imagine these different roles, so 5 different roles in a reading circle, they come to class. And so the way the Jigsaw works is you develop expertise. So I get all the source evaluators together in a group, and they kind of compare notes. They decide, okay, as a group, can they come to a consensus on what the strengths and weaknesses are of this source? So in another group, they're talking about the biography of the author, or they're the devil's advocate and trying to come up with the top 3 criticisms of the text that we looked at. So they develop that expertise. And then in the second breakout room, we bring them back to their groups, their reading circles, and you have an expert in each of these roles. And then they basically go around, having built up the expertise and confidence from the first breakout room. They are then in a position to say, okay, I'm going to deepen your understanding of the text by getting you to think a little bit about who the author is, or what kinds of sources they're using, or here's some illustrations that help kind of make this kind of text a little bit more multimodal and accessible for you. So that's one example. And there, like Selma said, there are many ways of using the Jigsaw approach. And I was part of a group that kind of documented and created, using course flow. Again, Selma brought up, we have a really nice activity workflow of how to use the Jigsaw with group roles. The other one I'll say that I've been really using in person and I've been adapting to online is reflective writing. So I have my students do exploration journals. They can do audio, they can do podcasts, they could do voiceover slides, or they can do writing. But I always ask them to identify 3 takeaways from a text and develop 2 engaging discussion questions. And we work on what an engaging discussion question is. So throughout the semester, they're learning what makes a good or bad discussion question on experience. So they come to class, I put them in breakout rooms, and I've had a chance to kind of look at their exploration journals because the deadline is always 24 hours before class. So I give myself a day to kind of look through what they're doing. And I say, you go into your first group and you take turns asking what you think is your best discussion question. You engage with it, and you one at a time go around. They explore, like, if they can, 3 or 4 discussion questions. Then their job at the end of that session is to kind of identify what ended up being their most productive discussion question. and they will have discussed it. They come back to the whole class, and then they facilitate the discussion saying, we're going to ask you a question. What was our most productive discussion question? And before we tell you what we thought, we'll kind of let the whole class just contribute some ideas. So this is my way of kind of delegating and coaching them on how to facilitate collaborative kind of learning.
Have you modified your approach to help students adequately prepare for assessments this fall? I imagine assessments are not too far off for the midterms. Can you tell us a little bit about what you're doing?
Anything to do with assessments, I always get my students to rehearse it first. So I have a very low stake, like if I'm going to ask them to use a Dropbox on Moodle, first week I say, write your name, say hello, tell me one boring thing about yourself, and upload that as a Word document to your first assignment. So you're not worried about content, you're just rehearsing the technical side of the assessment. So, because that's something right away, like we're trying to reduce anxiety, and students are so overwhelmed by the number of platforms. So any chance we can to build their confidence and their ease, and flag students who are going to struggle with certain kinds of technologies, because then we also need to offer alternatives. But I'm not dealing with online exams or tests. So I was already using Turnitin before. And I don't use Turnitin because it's anti-plagiarism. I actually love Turnitin because it's really kind of revolutionized my grading. I'm able to kind of create a database of feedback, including links to videos, all the silly stuff that is important to teach our students around technical writing, but I hate writing in their individual work. I now drag and drop, say, this is how you do a hanging indent in your references. This is what it should look like. And here's a video that shows you how to do a hanging indent. Everything is online now. Like it's really hard for me to sit down and write things without looking at my screen. So that's another thing too, is I'm trying to really be strategic around what are things that I could potentially evaluate that don't require me to constantly look at the screen as well. So I've actually had my students recording podcasts and audio. So I actually, for them, they can just talk to their phone or their screen. And it's been so nice to just like turn away from the screen and listen to them. And I get to engage back with them by using voice recording of my own instead of written comments. So they talk to me and I respond to them in recorded voice comments.
So assessments are, I think, the biggest challenge of this online remote teaching learning shift. It became very clear from last semester's experience that traditional testing is going to be challenging in this medium for many reasons: connectivity, internet connectivity, accessibility to the tools, from the tech aspect, to challenges in terms of plagiarism possibilities and all of that. So we have to revise our assessments. I'm not sure that there's a perfect or ideal way, and I think it depends on the teacher and what the teacher is trying to assess. What I found has worked well for me is to try to be flexible with the students. So flexible deadlines. Last semester was key, and I'm still maintaining that policy for the semester. So a lot of flexibility. So if the students cannot use the computer or be online at a specific time because their sister, brothers, or moms or dads or somebody needs the computer at the time, or their internet is failing, that they're not being penalized. And also I reduced instead of having like big chunks of assessments, have the assessments be worth less and spread them out so that they're more manageable, so that if a student unfortunately misses one, that they're not, it doesn't set them back too much. I favor the sort of take-home reflective writing type of assessment because of, well, for one, it's really hard to plagiarize. It's very personal. I try to ask the students to write, even if I give them problem to have I try to encourage them to find a solution that is very personal to them, so that, you know, unless they have to really understand the material to answer the question. It's not regurgitating. We have, so like, yeah, the shift of assessment has to change from thinking of the teachers as like the gatekeepers of content to like the helping the students, the coaches of the students, helping them to understand the content. Because if we're just the gatekeepers of content, we fail. There's way more content out there online than what we can provide them with, but we can provide them with strategies and tools to understand that content. So the assessment, the designing of assessment has shifted from what do you know to how do you make sense of what you know.
Can I add one more thing?
Sure.
I think is really interesting about the shift this fall is, you know, we think of assessment and we think about, you know, what do we grade that's, you know, aligned with the outcomes of the course, all the stuff that we've learned about creating assessment activities, but it's taken on, it's a whole new, like there's a whole new culture of assessment around non-graded aspects of our course, right? Like never before, like there's so many more teachers, maybe to a fault. We all rush to create our surveys, you know, that we sent our students, assessing their needs. We're all super curious, either because we need validation as teachers that what we're doing, you know, that they're happy with how we're running things, or like, so there's just like I think a real genuine curiosity about bringing more self-assessments into the class as well, having students kind of check in with themselves, that they are assessing their own learning in the class in a way, you know, that's not about how they're graded, but just the learning environment overall. So I think for me, that's really exciting because like you know, assessment isn't just grades. It's like any activity we do in a class to kind of check in with the learning, you know, the cognitive outcomes, but also the social and the study skills. So I think, you know, a lot more people are interested in CATs, you know, the classroom assessment techniques. How do we kind of, you know, I'm used to reading body language in the class, but now I have to pause. And do I have a way, like, can I get a thumbs up if we're feeling good and we're ready for me to move on, you know? So I think people are really curious about developing more in-class assessment techniques you know, to check in with levels of engagement as opposed to just, you know, digestion of content. So I think that this is another moment to kind of move from thriving, you know, thriving in terms of how we assess engagement in the classroom.
And hopefully that's something we'll be able to carry back when we go to in-presence teaching.
Do you have any advice for teachers who are looking for ways to motivate their students this fall?
I'm always encouraging people to get feedback, you know, from their students. Ask your students how they're doing. Ask them, there are strategic ways. Don't ask your students like, what's wrong with my course? Say, if you could change one thing about how this course is going, like what would you change? So there are kind of compassionate ways of getting feedback from students that aren't going to throw you under the bus. But I think it's really important. I also think it's helpful for students. I often show them is like, the thing that you would like me to change is the thing that the other student would like me to keep. And this is my job as a teacher, is accessibility and variety of strategies. So, but you can learn a lot from your students. So definitely finding ways to let students communicate with you. And if you're not used to doing that, like talk to someone who is, because you don't want to just like open it up. Like there are creative ways and strategic ways of getting feedback from your students. And there are creative ways like, so I made my course outlines, my PowerPoint slides, they're all living documents. So I use Google Slides, and even my course outline is a link, is a Google link, so that my students can actually leave me comments or post questions, right? Which they can't do when it's a PDF. So now I'll suddenly, like at 1 a.m, see the student kind of just posted like, what do you mean by, and then I like, oh, and I'm like, okay, I'm gonna actually add another sentence in my outline that kind of clarifies. There are all these ways that you can open up the channels of communication through online teaching.
Selma?
So frequent check-ins with students, like Cory was saying, and without being too overwhelming either. So just regular, either like the thumbs up, thumbs down, thumbs sideways, I tell them, or using polls, sometimes anonymous polls, to help the students express how they're perceiving the course or how they're perceiving things to progress. Helps, because they feel a little bit more comfortable saying that in an anonymous way. And I think, and be gentle with yourself and with the students. Remember, like, these are stressful times for all of us, and every teacher can think of their course as being the most important course, obviously, but our students who have a full course load sometimes have to take 7-8 courses, so that's a lot of hours, that's a lot of demands, that's a lot of flipped classroom, that's a lot of reading, that's a lot of writing, that's a lot of assessments. So remember that, what is the reality of our students? If we're struggling and working overtime on one course, imagine what they're going through with 7 of them, on top of other difficulties they might be facing. So having those frequent check-ins, and just using strategies to decrease stress in class, just to remind the students, we're all human, just we're all in the same boat, let's row one wave at a time. Helps humanizing the process.
So I think the other thing too is avoid the 0 to hero. Like, the whole point is, when you are faced with a workshop where 7 different technologies come up in conversation, or you're on a website page where there's like 20 different kinds of strategies and activities, that the goal isn't that you adopt all of them and integrate them into your class. It's just like, and our job is just to pick 2 out of the 20 that speak to our personalities, and just play with those and let the others go for now, and don't try and revolutionize your course too quickly, because it's the same for students. Like, we're asking them a lot too, and we need to kind of take them step by step.
Thanks to Cory and Selma for joining us today, and for providing insight into their pedagogical strategies for keeping students motivated at a distance. For our viewers, please feel free to add some of your stories about the transition to alternative teaching in the comments area below.
Thanks again, Cory and Selma.
Thank you.